everybody, and welcome back to another episode of
The
GOAT. What's up, D?
Not much, my man. How are you?
We're doing good on this side of the screen. How was your Thanksgiving?
Man, it was really good. A lot of good food.
Hey,
Didn't
your
have the
voice
traditional
isn't coming
Thanksgiving.
in very strong, dude. Is that just me or?
I think it might just be you.
Okay, it may just be me. I had to turn up.
Yeah, no worries. No, what I was saying is that my Thanksgiving was actually not a traditional one. I actually had a Friendsgiving, so I didn't get to see my family like normal, but it was definitely good. Got a lot of good eating and a lot of good, what do you call it, time together with people.
I love that. I got to see my family for the first time in a couple of years, really. The COVID and then I went and saw my mom and dad, and it was really cool to see them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been home for Thanksgiving in a long time, so it was very cool. I really enjoyed Thanksgiving this year, and I got to drive 4 hours with my daughter, and we had to talk. She talked to me like it was amazing. For 4 hours, I learned about my daughter. It was probably the best thing that's ever happened.
That's so awesome.
I know.
That's so awesome.
I know.
Those little small luxuries as a parent.
You know, I'm so excited about this week's guest. Mr. Danny Clinkscale. He is reasonably irreverent. What does that mean, D?
I don't know. That's actually one of my first questions to ask him.
Me too.
But I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I can't wait to see what that means.
Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and bring him on.
Let's bring Danny on.
How you doing, guys?
Great, Danny. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Great to be here.
Good. So we got so many questions that we want to ask you, but our first one is, what does irreverent, your podcast, what does that mean?
Reasonably Irreverent, you start a podcast and you're thinking about a particular title, just popped into my head. I think that I like to be a little bit offbeat and look at things maybe in a slightly obtuse way. That would be the irreverent part, but I am a really logical and fact-based person, so that's the reasonable part. So Reasonably Irreverent is how that became the title of my podcast, and those podcasts span a real wide variance of different things, which is one of the fun things about doing it. The only potential negative about the title is that even my wife has occasionally slipped when being asked what the name of the podcast is and called it Reasonably Irrelevant.
I know, I've said that twice now.
That is absolutely not what you want to be when you do a podcast, is irrelevant. So it's Reasonably Irreverent. So yes, a little offbeat, little kind of a skewed way of looking at things, and irreverently doing so, but doing so with an eye toward being factual and not making fake news your platform.
Well, and that's kind of like your platform and your life and everything wrapped up into one. It's like you have made your life talking about other people's lives, or digging into other people's lives, or learning more about other people. And that has been your career. How did you get started in broadcasting, Danny?
Well, I'm a broadcasting baby, basically. My father was a broadcaster. My father was an anchorman in Boston, Massachusetts, worked at various television stations there. His biggest and most high-profile assignment was as the morning newsman on the Eye Opener News, it was called, at Channel 5, the ABC affiliate in Boston. And that's the show that goes on before Good Morning America as a network broadcast. And then he does, when they come back for the news during Good Morning America, that was, he did that. But he did a wide variety of broadcasting things. He was a disc jockey, and so he was a broadcaster, and he wasn't really the inspiration for me being a broadcaster, because why I wanted to be a broadcaster was because I really love sports. But what it did make me realize is that you're never all that impressed with your own father. Usually, he's this guy who's in the next room who makes you do your chores, and even though you love him, he can be a pain in the neck sometimes. And so you're like, well, if my father can do this, then certainly I can. And also I had a tremendous amount of opportunities because of the fact that he was a broadcaster. I don't know if it was because of the fact that he was a broadcaster or the fact that I sort of had an aptitude for it, but I was always the kid who was the MC of Flag Day or whatever ceremony there was going on at school, or I was the host. And
that's awesome.
so that always happened when I was a kid. And also during a span of time when I was in grade school, in 5th, 6th, 7th grade, he worked on the weekends at a radio and television station, which is, you can't have a radio and television station now. It's against FCC rules. But so those were both in the same building. And it's a more relaxed atmosphere on the weekends at any broadcast facility like that. So he would bring me and sometimes my little brother, but me all the time, to work with him. And so I spent time in the newsroom, in the studio, and working on the typewriter and looking at the wire service machine and running little films back when you did things like that through a viewfinder.
Right.
And I also appeared on all kinds of kids' television shows because they used to tape them on the weekends. There, they tape all 5 of like Bozo the Clown or Romper Room or this Western show they had. And, people would send in for tickets, but if they were a little short, somebody would usually duck their head into the newsroom and say, "Hey, is Clinkscale's kid here today?" And I'd go off and be on with Miss Jean or Bozo the Clown or whatever. So I did dozens of those, and just makes you comfortable with. I did commercials, and I used to be on the air with the disc jockeys there and do stuff like that. So it was kind of in my blood, and I always knew I wanted to do it. And I knew I either wanted to be a professional athlete, and I was a good athlete, but certainly was never approached being that good. Or I was going to talk about being a broadcaster. So I'd talk about sports as a broadcaster. So that was, I basically knew what I was going to do with my life from the time I was probably 7 or 8 years old.
Wow, that's amazing.
That is really amazing.
So, Danny, did you ever struggle? Like, do you struggle with a lot of the athletes that I work with, or struggle with like performance anxiety, or have blocks, or you're on the air and it's like, no, I can't remember what
I have. Fortunately, almost never had any experiences like that, but I can't say that I've had none. I've had 2 or 3 anxiety attacks when I was on the radio during a game in Las Vegas. It wasn't because I, overindulged or anything, but I didn't eat properly before a broadcast one time, and I was kind of probably dehydrated or whatever. And right in the middle of a game, I just felt myself getting overheated, and I plowed my way through, and nobody really would have known if they were listening. But for me, I was like feeling like I was going to die. And so that was the first time it happened. So then once it happens once, you kind of, are concerned about it a little bit, but generally no, broadcasting it's very natural for me, and it's sort of like falling out of a boat. And but I can't say that I've never experienced it. So it's probably a good thing to have done so that that there is that possibility, and you want to stay on your P's and Q's, as it were.
Right, exactly. I've had 2 myself, and they're the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
These weren't too bad because you just plowed through. But I think the worst part of them is that you have in the back of your mind that it can't happen. That's the only thing.
Right.
And also I had a couple of instances where I was in weddings and I fainted. So I fainted on wedding as the best man. I didn't completely faint there, but I felt faint. And it was a funny story because I was up at the altar, and it was a Catholic wedding, and it was a long thing, and we were kneeling afterwards. People said that if you kneel for a long period of time, sometimes you can lose your circulation or whatever. So we kneeled for a long time, and then when I stood up, I felt extremely lightheaded. And there I was on the altar, and I just walked over to a chair on the side. And but I got through it. But what was funny is that it was the groom was actually who's the television voice of the Philadelphia Flyers and has been for a long, long time. He was marrying a Sicilian girl. It was in Utica, New York, and they had an extremely large Sicilian population there. And there were all these Italian ladies there at this wedding, very old school. And I must have got pinched on the cheek 100 times. I was at the receiving line, and all these ladies were coming through, and are you all right, son? We need to get you some food.
The little guy that passed out.
Right. Yeah. So that happened a couple of times. So I know how that goes.
Well, it's kind of ironic that you say that, and what's happened with like Simone Biles and a lot of the athletes that are coming out and saying, hey, this is happening to me and I'm struggling with this. And, announcers run into those issues. And I was an athlete, and coaches run into those issues, all the pressure to be on you to win and all those things. It's like, I think we're finally getting a little bit of a clue, Danny, that mental health is important in these fields.
Well, I remember how much negativity there was, or how much misunderstanding of when Zach Greinke decided to walk away from baseball for the Royals.
Yeah.
And much of the general reaction from many people, including the likes of, George Brett or whatever, was sort of, come on, man up. You got it great. You're making all this money. And but what I think people don't understand, who have a familiarity with mental illness, is that it doesn't matter what kind of good things are going on in your life. If you're not in a good headspace mentally, that all doesn't matter to you. You'd rather be going and cutting grass, as he was talking about, and being content doing that, than if you're having some kind of a horror show of anxiety and being on the mound or throwing pitches or whatever. And I think the most alarming thing to me that I heard was the Simone Biles one, was because I had never heard of the twisties.
Yes.
Right. No.
To think of the fact that you have to have the equilibrium to land these elaborate, twisting vaults and everything else. And if you lose that sense, that's just, you could break your neck. You could die, literally.
And as high as she goes,
And so you can understand the anxiety that would come about when you're up in the air and you're like, I don't remember how I did this.
How I'm supposed to land. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and how I'm supposed to land. And because you're completely, you're doing it by muscle memory, basically. And if that muscle memory goes away, that's just dangerous for you. Now there's, different types of it with Osaka and other people in the fame and that's involved. And, Japanese athletes, you don't even, I don't think Americans have even any concept of the lengths to which these athletes in Japan are adored, covered. They can't go anywhere. I covered the Royals, and they had two very marginal players on their team. Outfielder, Aoki, I think was one of the, and then they had back in the day, they had Max Suzuki, who was a pitcher. And these guys weren't even, star players and they had like 6-7 camera crews every day at Kauffman Stadium. And their only assignment was to cover Nori Aoki. That was it. That was their story every day. So, we go into a press conference every day, and there would always be a question from a Japanese media person about, Aoki may not have even played that day. Well, why didn't he play? I would have thought it was the most boring assignment I could ever imagine for, a Japanese, for a sports journalist to do the same story every day. But they were traveling with the ball, following a Major League Baseball team and staying in 5-star hotels, so nobody's going to cry for them. But that's not Hideki Matsuyama or Naomi Osaka, champions at the top of their sport. Those are just regular old people, and they're getting that kind of attention. So that pressure is unbelievably intense.
Yeah, I can't even imagine the pressure. Although I think they, like the Eastern cultures, work on the mental game more than we do here.
Yes.
Well, I do think they do. Yes. But even with that, to have that kind of microscope on you, to have you be Michael Jordan times 10, literally.
Right.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. And
I couldn't imagine that with Simone, all that pressure, everybody, she is the GOAT, there's no doubt about it. She is
she was the face of the Olympics going in.
Yes, exactly.
Commercial. Books being put out, kids' books being put out.
Right.
And
her coming out with all the abuse and everything. She's the heat that was on her had to be so immense. And then not only say she's dealing with the trauma, Danny, but then she's dealing with what comes with trauma, which is anxiety.
Oh,
right.
You live in fight or flight after you've been in traumatized, and then you go try to perform in the Olympics.
Right. You have to be centered. I mean,
Right.
in a situation to perform at your highest level, obviously. And,
Exactly.
People just think about just people talking about in a football setting or whatever, quote unquote, distractions. And these are the most minor of things that coaches and other people try to avoid for their team, be it, wives and girlfriends or the crowd noise or even these little minimal things that can affect your performance. And when you're talking about, anxiety and mental health, that's overbearing.
Right.
Yes.
I was talking to John McGraw, and he's an ex-chief, and he was talking about all the ways that you don't want to hide, or you don't want to show your physical injuries necessarily, and you don't want to show any mental weaknesses when you're playing on a team.
Because you want to play.
Think you're tough and you're ready to play. And he says, so if you're struggling, you're almost told not to talk about it. Don't go there. Don't bring that up because it'll bring the team down. And it's like, that's usually just the opposite of what really happens. You get the team supporting each other, knowing they're real crap. That's when they perform.
Yes.
Right. Teams want to be supportive of each other. They talk about it being a brotherhood and things like that. Well, if you're in a true brotherhood, then you share things
each other's
with
burdens.
your brothers. And brotherhood is not a situation where you're going to be evasive or not truthful about that. But hey, the culture of sports in general, especially on the male side, is toughness. And,
totally.
And completely, manning up, as it were, or be a man.
That's
up.
The sadness about even the people that go to, though, or the people that they go to for the help are the ones that are saying keep it secret or only talk to me or find an alternate way to get it done. And then if there really is a serious problem, now you're going to add the abuse of substances to cope with it or to get through, and then you got a whole mess of stuff. Because you can't let that go public at all.
Hold it all in.
It's done. So it's an extreme amount when you get to that level. So I am so appreciative that they're the voice now for hopefully these young athletes to start seeing that, hey, if you're trying to feel some things like this now, handle it now. Because you don't have to be the strongest in the world to help your team perform right now.
Right. Because being in a proper mental health state is even more important than being physically ready to play. No question. Really think about in any sport like golf or basketball or stepping to the free throw line. That's all mental. You've practiced your free throws or you've practiced your putts a million times. You can do it under a not so stressful situation, just 100 times in a row. But given the crowd or your own anxiety, it can destroy even the greatest performers.
And that's the way I look back at I kind of started off, I was a wrestler and I was really good and all that. I look back and it's like, I wonder how good I could have been if I wasn't crapping the bed before every match. It's like, oh, I wonder what I could have. I was so tight and tense before my matches. And it's like, really, I wonder how good I could have been.
Well, in some cases, it's not. I mean, they do talk about this a lot in golf, is the fact that just embrace the fact you are going to be nervous. You are going to be in a situation where you feel like your hands are like lead or you can't draw the club back. Bill Russell famously used to throw up before every playoff game that he played.
Right.
But he, quote unquote, got used to it, I guess, or this was just part of the process for him.
Part of the process.
My wife is an opera singer and she has talked a million times about how, every performance that you go out for, you're going to have some kind of real anxiety. It's just fighting through it. And you also hear athletes say over and over again, if you're in a place where you're playing an important match or an important game and you're not feeling that type of sensation, then something is wrong there. If you're just saying, well,
Right.
la-di-da, this is nothing's going on today. So it's an absolute, imperative aspect of sports and performance of any kind.
Well, and that's the key, Danny, is, it's going to happen. We're going to have anxiety, fears, doubts, all that kind of stuff. How do we respond to that? What's our go-to when that happens is the key. Because a lot of people don't have the go-to. And, Tiger Woods has his anchor and Jeff Hornacek has it. And they have their, what do I do just as soon as I do panic or I am stressed, or I am having doubt? This is what I do. And most athletes don't have that, I find. They just fight through it and play a little bit better. But if you've got...
Or just have to deal with the results. That's
right.
The one I experienced.
Well, the other, most of the time people just talk about the simple act of making sure you're breathing properly.
What? That's the number one, Danny. If I was when I was at the Olympic Committee, there was Ken Ravizza used to say, whatever problem the athletes were having, he was a sports psychologist there, and he just say they need to breathe differently. They need to breathe differently. They need this. They need to do breathing like this. And it's like, he was right. So much of it came down to how you were breathing. You can lower your heart rate by 20 beats in 30 seconds if you're breathing correctly.
Right.
So
and most people, and it was like you asked about becoming a broadcaster, and one of the ways that I was helped out by my father was that he taught me how to breathe properly.
Right.
And he would literally, when I was a kid, when he knew that I had some interest in doing that,
That's
and
awesome.
He was a trained broadcaster, but he wasn't a college educated man, but he had gone to broadcasting school, and he literally would lay me down on the bed and he'd put a book on my stomach, a heavy book. And then he would teach me that when you take a breath, you don't suck in, you push your stomach out. I mean, that's
right.
how you fill your air channel with air is. Right. So it's sort of the opposite. Most people would say, take a breath, and they'd go, and
it's
suck
all
their
about
stomach
the
in.
lungs.
And but what you're doing really is filling your chamber with air. So I learned that at a very early age, and then it just becomes second nature to you.
That's very cool.
Because in broadcasting, breathing is very important too.
Oh, huge all that.
That actually makes me have two questions for you, Danny. One, because of you being a broadcaster, sports broadcasting especially, do you have a favorite sport?
I like many sports, so maybe it's changed from time to time. My best sport as a child was baseball.
Second
player.
Question.
I was a prodigy, somewhat of a prodigy as a baseball player, and I was good. The sport I enjoyed playing the most eventually probably was basketball, but I only came to basketball as at a later age. My friends all played basketball, and I didn't play much basketball as a young guy. And then before my senior year of high school, I was like, oh, my friends are on the team. And I just took a whole summer and just learned how to play basketball, basically.
Oh, wow.
And I made the team, but I didn't know the ins and outs. And by the time I got to college, I was actually asked to walk on to the Kansas team. Thank goodness I got hurt and didn't do it, because that could have been embarrassing. But I did love the fact that there was a lot of energy involved with playing basketball. And then eventually I became, when I got a little older and I had time to have an outlet, I became a fairly competent golfer and played in amateur events and things like that, because it was an outlet into your 30s where you could still do it and you could do it by yourself. And so I've participated and liked all sports, but my favorite sport to observe and study is still baseball. And as boring and whatever as people that is, I've always enjoyed the analytical side of it and the statistical side.
Yes,
even before analytics. I love still watching a baseball game pitch by pitch. Most people these days don't, but I really like it. There's probably almost no sport I don't have some affection for. The competition, the dedication, the fact that you don't know what's going to happen It's
Mm-hmm.
it's theater without a script, and
Yes.
that's really the thing that I like about it the most.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
that
that's a great
theater
way to look.
without a
Yeah.
script. I like that
I
a
love
lot.
that, Danny. That's powerful. Sports or theater without a script.
Yeah, I just thought that's the first time I ever said that. So
I'm gonna tell my
there you go.
daughter because she's a big theater geek.
Right. Well, and actually, as I've grown into I actually am a theater geek, and I like musical theater and things like that. My wife's an opera singer, so
I love it.
I've gotten into
That's very unique.
Not that, but she's an outstanding and was a professional opera singer for a long time before I met her. But anyway, so I have appreciation for people's excellence, no matter what it is, be it you be a chef or a musician or you're in theater or whatever. To me, honing your craft and having dedication to it is admirable and enjoyable to observe.
Agree.
You when we had talked offline, you made a comment. Have a passion for it. The results will come in return. Explain some of that for us.
Well, I think that if you're going to do something and want to excel at it, you shouldn't be thinking about the fact of where this is going to take you. Right. It's just the act of doing it that should be the passion that fuels you. You know, I talked about playing basketball and wanting to make the team. Well, there was that goal, but the path along the way was enjoying shooting 300 shots in a row, or
right,
or be down at the church parking lot, knowing that if you hit the far end of the rim and the ball bounced that way, it went down the street. So I mean, you didn't want to do that.
You didn't want to miss shot the
and
right
if you're,
shot for everything.
And if you play golf and you want to play well, you have to put the time in and work and practice, and enjoying that process and having passion for it is important, and not thinking about what eventually will come about. When you get to a point where all you care about is the results, and that probably happens to some people in all levels. If you're trying to be a great salesman, you should just put the best sales presentation you can together. And if it doesn't work, you should have the satisfaction that you did the best you could. Now, if you didn't, and you realize, I just because you didn't get the sale doesn't mean you didn't do it right. But you also can look at it and say, I didn't put the proper preparation into this particular presentation or this particular tournament I was going to play or whatever. So you have, if you don't have the passion for it, I don't think there's any way you're going to succeed.
Right. I 100% agree with that. And, I was an A to B thinker, Danny. I was, when I win state in wrestling, then I'll be happy. When I accomplish this, then I'll be happy. When this happens, when I get D1, and it's like, looking back in hindsight, that was the wrong way to look at it.
Being happy was the first step.
Right. On the journey. Yeah. I should have been happy with where I was, but I wasn't. I was always, when I achieve this, then I'll allow myself to be happy. Right. And that's sad. I should have been happy because I was there. I was performing. I was trying. I was doing my best. And I think a lot of people get locked into that mindset of when I do this, when I accomplish this, then I am somebody. Then I'm happy.
Right. Yeah, and I think that in the end, if you do it that way, you'll probably get to where the goal that you set, and you'll be like, why am I not happy
right
now? Well, because you need to be happy along the way. I mean, that's not going to make you happy. If you're not happy and then you win the lottery, you're not going to be happy that day.
Right.
You may think you are. I mean, you'll be happy at the moment. I'll
Danny,
give it a shot.
Danny, this is the number one thing that I think we work with our athletes, believe it or not, is you got to learn to like you. You got to learn to be happy with where you're at and what you're doing, your improvements, your effort, those kinds of things, because not everybody's going to start great, and it's going to be a tough road, and there's going to be battles. And if you're not loving the process, you're not going to stick around.
Mm-hmm. Now,
so I so much appreciate what you said.
Well, that's
another thing that stood out.
I can't imagine. You have to be so uber talented to just take sort of a laissez-faire approach to things and succeed. Now, it can happen. There are people who are that gifted, and they can give a C effort and still give a B performance because they're so gifted.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
but most people aren't like that. And the truly great people have the A+ ability and the passion and desire to be the very best. And that's when you get
100%.
Tiger Woods, or you get Michael Jordan, and in some cases it's probably not the most healthy. I think we all can observe the fact that Michael Jordan probably at many times in his life wasn't a particularly happy person.
For sure.
I think he just enjoyed the fact that he was the best.
Yeah.
That's just I think he's a different kind of example of the fact that you have Tiger Woods is kind of like that too. I've been around Tiger Woods a lot, and that was especially now he's mellowed. That was a super ruthless person, to say the least.
Really? I love that.
I believe it.
I can see it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I covered Tiger Woods multiple times in his younger and when he was at the top, and it just wasn't pleasant. Let's put it that way. But he was absolutely micro-focused on being the best. Totally. That's all he cared about. And didn't care, what other people thought, clearly. And it worked. But I think he's realized now in his later years that he's embraced the challenges that he's had. And he seems like a much more happy and content person. Although I don't think he would trade all that hard work and all that dedication for what he accomplished and get into that mountaintop.
Right. It all depends on the person. You're right. It's like there's a lot of people that could be great if they wanted to take it to that level, but not everybody wants to be great.
Right. Well,
he's actually a great example of.
I think they think they want to be great, but maybe. And then there's some people who absolutely, they talk about, I make several references to golf because I think it works in the psychology of sports a lot. Yeah. They say they'll talk about the golfers who they get 5 or 6 under par, and some guys are like, oh, geez, let's just keep it right here, and this is going to be a good day. And the guys who take it really low are the ones who just say, well, I've made 6 birdies already. Let's keep on making birdies. They don't get into protection mode, and we see that in team sports too, where you get yourself a nice lead. Are you going to play the way you did to get this particular lead, or are you just going to try to protect that? So you see that in all areas of sports.
Right. Danny, we got to be done. I'm so excited that you joined us today, and I love to hear your vantage point. And from your experiences, you've met more goats than most people know that there are goats out there.
Right. I have. It's certainly a fortunate aspect. Certainly a fortunate aspect of what I do, and and I'm excited that you've been excited. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And that actually will lead us to the GOAT tip of the week, which you said before was to be true to yourself. Tell us a little bit more about that, Danny.
Well, I think that goes in part with being passionate about what you're going about. I mean, and if you don't do it in a genuine way, I think you won't have the clear head that we've been talking about throughout this particular podcast. If you're trying to do something for what Jeff talked about, the reason that just the goal itself, if I get there, I'll be happy. Instead, try to create a more centered and self-satisfied you, and that'll make it much easier for you to approach those goals and have the enthusiasm to do the work to get those goals done.
Exactly. We here at Triumph, we call that owning your shit. Yes, and it's like,
good phrase, man. Yeah, that is absolutely a good phrase. And luckily we're in the podcast age, and you can say owning your shit.
I know, isn't that nice?
It's nice. Even though you have to put the little hashtag-y things when you put it out there. So.
Well, Danny, before we go, I would like you to kind of sum up, how can people contact you? Tell us a little bit about your podcast and when it happens, and so that people can follow you.
Well, the easiest way is just go to DannyClinkscale.com, but my podcasts are available at all major podcast outlets, Apple Podcast and Stitcher and all those. If you just type in my name somewhere in a Google search, you'll find it. Just put in Reasonably Irreverent Podcast or Danny Clinkscale, and it'll take you there. I do podcasts at the very least on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Mondays is a sports oriented one. Wednesdays is music, arts, film, things like that. Fridays is personality profiles of prominent Kansas Cityans and people from across the country. And then I do a variety of occasional other things too. So
Great.
All the content you could ever want and more. But the easiest way is DannyClinkscale.com. So
great.
Everything's there, and everything I've ever done. I've done like 800 podcasts now in 3 years. So if you want to go to a desert island, you'd have plenty of things to consume. You'd be busy for a while.
Well, I love it, Danny, and I love your attitude and your look on things. And I am so happy that you joined us for the show.
Well, I'm happy to have joined you and appreciate you asking, and much good luck with this podcast. It does a lot of good work for a whole lot of people, and I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Danny. And if anybody wants to, if people out there are struggling with teens or high school or college, anybody, if people are out there struggling right now and don't have a resource, contact either Coach D or me, and we can either help you ourselves or we can find somebody that will. Look forward to talking to you next time, and have a great week. Bye, folks.